The silence I was chasing was a specific frequency. It was the absence of digital chatter, the cessation of the relentless, 60-cycle hum of institutional life. For 25 years, my world had been a CEF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, a windowless box of beige walls and humming servers, deep in the bowels of Fort Meade. As a signals intelligence analyst for the NSA, my senses were attuned not to the rustle of leaves, but to the whispers of encrypted data packets, the subtle tells in a waveform, the ghostly chatter of ghosts in the machine. I had lived my life in the ether, a digital ghost myself, hunting for needles of meaning in global haystacks of noise. When I retired, I didn't want a corner office or a lucrative consulting gig. I wanted a lawn. I wanted the tangible, analog satisfaction of pulling a weed from the earth with my own two hands. I bought a house in a community called Sterling Meadows, a name so perfectly, blandly suburban, it felt like a parody. But the houses were solid, the lots were spacious, and the quiet was, for the most part, genuine. My goal was to decompress, to deprogram, to learn to exist in the physical world again. I would garden. I would read physical books made of paper. I would learn to identify birds by their songs, not by their thermal signatures on a satellite image. Of course, old habits die hard. A man who has spent his life listening cannot simply go deaf. I converted a small, insulated room in the basement into a state-of-the-art home office and listening post. It was my version of a retired mechanic's workshop, a place to tinker, to keep the skills sharp. A server rack for my media and data, a few high-end computers, and an array of antennas on the roof to pull in everything from amateur radio broadcasts to weather satellite data. To me, it was a hobby, a way to play with the technology I loved without the crushing weight of national security. The first disruption to my carefully calibrated peace arrived on the third day. Before the last of my moving boxes were even unpacked, I was on the roof, carefully mounting a small, discrete Yagi antenna, aligning it for optimal reception of NOAA satellite weather feeds. The sun was warm, a gentle breeze was blowing, and for a moment, I felt a sense of profound contentment. Then, a voice, sharp and accusatory as a shard of glass, sliced through the air from the perfectly manicured lawn below. "What, in God's name, do you think you are doing?" I looked down to see a woman standing with her hands on her hips, her body rigid with indignation. She was dressed in a pristine white tennis skirt and a pastel polo shirt, a visor pulled down low over her impeccably coiffed hair. She looked like a recruiting poster for a country club that I would never, ever want to join. "I'm installing an antenna," I called down, keeping my voice friendly and non-threatening. "I can see that," she snapped. "I am Diane Davenport. I am the chair of the Community Standards Committee for the Sterling Meadows Homeowners Association. And that," she pointed a trembling, manicured finger at my antenna, "is a flagrant and unapproved violation of Bylaw 19 subsection F, which expressly forbids any external masts, poles, or signal receiving structures not explicitly approved in writing by the committee." I hadn't even received a copy of the bylaws yet. "I'm sorry. I'm Alex Mercer. I just moved in. This is just a simple weather antenna. It's no bigger than a standard TV antenna." "It is an eyesore, Mr. Mercer," she declared, her jaw tight with conviction. "It is a piece of industrial blight that detracts from the uniform aesthetic and, therefore, the property values of this entire community. Furthermore, who knows what kind of radiation that thing emits? We have children here." The leap from eyesore to dangerous radiation was so breathtakingly illogical, it almost made me laugh. This was a passive, receive-only antenna. It emitted nothing. It was as dangerous as a metal rake. I can assure you, "It's perfectly safe," I said, trying to de-escalate. "It just receives signals. It doesn't transmit anything." "That's what they all say," she muttered, pulling a small, leather-bound notebook from a pocket. She made a sharp, decisive note. "You have 24 hours to remove that thing from your roof. If it is not gone by tomorrow at noon, a formal violation will be issued, and a fine of $100 per day will be levied against your property. Read your covenants. Welcome to Sterling Meadows." She turned on her heel and marched back into her house, a pristine colonial that looked identical to every other house on the street. I remained on the roof, the Yagi antenna feeling suddenly heavy in my hands. I had spent my life dealing with hidden threats, with complex and shadowy adversaries who operated on a global scale. I had come here to escape all that, to live a simple, transparent life. And yet, on my third day, I had found a new adversary, one who was not shadowy, but blindingly, belligerently overt, one who did not care about logic or facts, only about absolute, unquestioning compliance with her own narrow, beige vision of the world. The frequency of my new life, I realized with a sinking heart, was not going to be peaceful silence. It was going to be the high-pitched, dissonant whine of Diane Davenport. The first official notice arrived, as promised, 25 hours later, taped to my front door in a plastic sleeve like a biohazard warning. The paper was thick and expensive. The letterhead embossed with the Sterling Meadows HOA logo, a majestic eagle that, under the circumstances, seemed to be sneering. Formal Violation Notice, Bylaw. 19F. Unapproved External Structure. It detailed my failure to remove the offending mast and confirmed that a $100 fine had been levied against my property, with an additional $100 to be added for each day of non-compliance. I sighed. My first instinct, honed by years of dealing with intractable bureaucracy, was to fight. I knew for a fact that the FCC's over-the-air reception devices OTARD rule preempted most HOA restrictions on antennas used for receiving video or data broadcasts. My weather satellite antenna arguably fell under that protection. I could file a petition, engage in a protracted legal battle, and I would likely win. But the thought of it was exhausting. I hadn't retired from the NSA to spend my days arguing with a suburban committee about federal telecommunications law. I had come here for peace. So, I compromised. I took down the Yagi antenna. I went online and found a newer, flatter phased array antenna that could be mounted flush against the chimney stack and painted to match the brick. It was less effective, but far more discreet. I submitted a formal application to the committee, complete with technical specifications and a swatch of the chimney blend paint I intended to use. I paid the initial $100 fine. It felt like paying tribute to a local warlord. It was easier, I told myself, to simply comply, to blend in, to become invisible. This, I would soon learn, was a catastrophic error in judgment. To a person like Diane Davenport, compliance is not a path to peace. It is blood in the water. My application for the new antenna was denied. The reason given was that, while less visible, it was still an unapproved modification to the home's original architectural profile. A week later, a new notice arrived. Violation Notice, Bylaw, 12C, Visible External Wiring. The offending item was the thin, black coaxial cable running from my satellite TV dish, a standard board-approved model down the side of my house to the entry point. The notice demanded that the cable be fully enclosed in a conduit painted to match the siding. The fine was $50. I spent a Saturday afternoon dutifully enclosing the cable, feeling the entire time like a character in a dystopian novel about oppressive conformity. The fines became a regular feature of my life, a constant, low-grade hum of harassment. I received a violation for the audible noise emanating from my garage, $75. The noise was the whisper-quiet cooling fans of my server rack, where I kept my backups and media. The decibel level was lower than that of a refrigerator. But Diane, who claimed to have sensitive hearing, had apparently stood on the sidewalk and detected it. I spent a weekend and several $100s lining the garage walls with sound-dampening acoustic foam. I received another notice for improper waste receptacle placement, $25, because I had put my recycling bin out on Tuesday evening for a Wednesday morning pickup, rather than waiting until Wednesday morning itself. A violation of a rule that seemed to exist only in Diane's mind. With each notice, each petty demand, I felt a familiar analytical part of my brain click on. I was being subjected to a systematic campaign of low-intensity psychological warfare. The objective was clear: to make my life so inconvenient, so burdened by trivialities, that I would either conform completely or leave. Diane was probing my defenses, testing my resilience, looking for a breaking point. It was, in its own small, pathetic way, a classic intelligence operation. I was in my basement office one evening, running a diagnostic on my network, not because of any issue, but out of old habit, when I noticed something. A subtle anomaly in the local network traffic. It was a faint, encrypted signal, bouncing between 3 houses on the other side of the cul-de-sac. It was heavily cloaked, using a sophisticated frequency hopping algorithm to hide in the background noise of the neighborhood's Wi-Fi signals. To a normal user, it would be invisible. To me, it was a flare in the darkness. My professional curiosity, long dormant, was piqued. I spent the next few hours capturing and analyzing the packets. I couldn't break the encryption; it was military grade, but I could analyze the metadata, the signal structure, its timing, its sheer professionalism. It was not the work of amateurs. It was not kids trying to steal Wi-Fi. It was something else. Something that had no place in a quiet suburban neighborhood. A cold feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. I had come to Sterling Meadows to escape the shadows, and now it seemed I had moved right next door to a whole nest of them. My internal threat matrix, the ingrained instinct that had kept me alive for years, began to light up. Diane Davenport was complaining about a 4-decibel fan hum from my garage, a meaningless, phantom threat. Meanwhile, a highly sophisticated, encrypted data stream was pulsing through her own backyard, and she was utterly, blissfully unaware. The irony was as thick as concrete. I saved a log of the signal data to an encrypted drive. I didn't know what it was, but my training told me one thing with absolute certainty: it was a problem, a real one, and my ridiculous HOA violating hobby had just made me the only person in the neighborhood who knew it existed. The transition from bureaucratic harassment to physical sabotage was as predictable as it was infuriating. Having failed to find me into submission, Diane, or someone acting on her behalf, decided to escalate. The target was, as always, my technology, the umbilical cords that connected my quiet life to the outside world. I woke up one Wednesday morning to find my entire digital world offline. No internet, no cable TV, no landline. My internal network was running perfectly, but the connection to the outside world had been severed. My first thought was a service outage, a common enough occurrence. I checked the utility company's website on my phone's data connection. No reported outages in my area. I went outside to inspect the utility box on the side of my house. Everything seemed normal. Then, I followed the thick, black fiber optic cable from the box towards the street, where it connected to the main neighborhood pedestal. I found the problem about halfway across my lawn. The cable, which was supposed to be buried a few inches underground, had been pulled up, and it had been cut. Not frayed by a squirrel, not accidentally nicked by a lawnmower blade. It was a clean, precise cut, made with a pair of heavy-duty cable cutters. The clean slice through the outer sheath and the delicate fibers within was unmistakable. It was deliberate. It was vandalism. And it was, of course, completely deniable. Who could prove who had crept into my yard in the dead of night with a pair of cutters? A surge of cold, focused anger washed over me. This was a direct attack. It was a message: we can cut you off. We can isolate you. I could have called the cable company. They would have sent a technician out in a day, maybe two. They would have run a new line, charged me a service fee, and the problem would be solved. But I wasn't just any customer. I had spent years of my life understanding and securing global communications infrastructure. The idea of letting this petty act of sabotage defeat me, even for a day, was galling. I went into my workshop and retrieved my old telecom toolkit. Inside was a high-precision fiber optic cleaver and a fusion splicer, tools I hadn't used in years. Working with fiber optic cable is a delicate, almost surgical process. The glass fibers inside are thinner than a human hair. I spent the next hour on my lawn, meticulously stripping the cable sheath, cleaning the fibers, cleaving them to a perfect 90-degree angle, and then using the fusion splicer to align and melt them back together with a tiny electrical arc. It was complex, frustrating work, requiring a surgeon's steady hand. As I worked, I felt a grim satisfaction. This was my world. Diane could write her ridiculous fines and enforce her beige-colored conformity. But here, in the realm of technology, I was the expert. She was a petty tyrant. I was a master craftsman. An hour later, I finished the splice, sealed it in a weatherproof enclosure, and reburied the cable. I went back inside and watched my network dashboard as every light blinked from red back to a steady, solid green. I was back online. The total downtime was less than 90 minutes. I walked over to my front window and looked out. Diane was on her porch, sipping from a mug, watching my house with an air of smug satisfaction. She was undoubtedly expecting to see a cable company truck, to see me inconvenienced, frustrated, defeated. When she saw me looking back at her from the window, her confident smirk faltered. She could not possibly understand how I had fixed the problem so quickly, and the look of confused fury that crossed her face was more satisfying than 1,000 legal victories. That evening, I was on a video call with my old colleague from the agency, Ben. He was one of the few people I still kept in touch with, a brilliant network engineer who now ran a private cybersecurity firm. "Sounds like you're having fun with the natives," he chuckled, after I told him about the cut cable. "Did you run a full diagnostic on the local node check for packet loss?" "Already did," I said. "The physical layer was compromised, but the network itself is stable. This wasn't a technical issue, Ben. It was a human issue. The local alpha female is trying to mark her territory. Local interference," he mused. "Always the hardest to filter out. So, what about that other signal you mentioned? The weird one. Still there?" I said, my tone growing more serious. "It's quiet, but it's consistent. Nightly bursts of data, always between 0200 and 0400. The encryption is still holding me out, but the packet structure is professional. Very professional. It has the signature of a state-sponsored actor." Ben went silent. We had both seen enough of those signatures in our careers to know what it meant. "Alex," he said, his voice now devoid of its earlier humor, "that's way above your pay grade. My friend, you're a civilian now, a gardener. You find something like that. You pass it up the chain. You do not engage." "I know," I said. though the puzzle of it was an itch I desperately wanted to scratch. I just, I don't know who to trust. There's still a few of the old guard at the bureau, Ben said. Agent Kincaid. Remember him, Cybercrime Division. He's solid. If this thing is what you think it is, he's the one to call. But you do it anonymously. A tip. You are not an asset. You are a private citizen who happened to notice something. Understood. Understood. I said. I had the contact info. I had the data logs. But making that call felt like stepping back into the world I had fought so hard to leave. For now, I would just watch. I would listen. My home was more than just my sanctuary. It was my observation post. And I had a feeling that the real threat in Sterling Meadows wasn't the woman with the clipboard, but the silent, invisible whispers in the dark. Having failed to intimidate me with fines or cripple me with sabotage, Diane shifted her campaign to a new front: my reputation. The Sterling Meadows Community Online Forum, a private website once dedicated to organizing potlucks and recommending plumbers, became her personal tool for propaganda and public shaming. Her methods were a masterclass in the art of slander by insinuation, painting me as a bizarre, reckless, and potentially dangerous eccentric without ever having to provide a shred of actual evidence. Her first post on the matter was cloaked in the guise of neighborly concern. "Good morning, Sterling Meadows," it began, accompanied by a cheerful sunshine emoji. "Let's talk about radio frequency interference. I've had a few neighbors mention that their Wi-Fi has been spotty lately, and sometimes the garage door openers are acting up. Just a friendly reminder that unshielded or improperly installed electronic equipment can sometimes leak signals that interfere with other devices. Let's all be mindful of our electronic hobbies to ensure a clear and connected community for everyone." The post was a work of insidious genius. She didn't name me, but she didn't need to. I was the new guy with the antennas and the garage full of junk, as she had taken to calling it in her violation notices. I was the obvious suspect. The comments section lit up with agreement. "Now that you mention it, my baby monitor has been fuzzy," wrote one woman. "My smart TV keeps disconnecting from the internet," added another. Of course, none of this had anything to do with my equipment, which was professionally shielded and operated entirely within its designated frequencies. The neighborhood's Wi-Fi issues were far more likely due to the 20-plus overlapping networks competing for the same limited channels, a standard problem in any modern suburb. But Diane had provided them with a simpler, more satisfying explanation. It was the weird new guy's fault. The social climate, already chilly, dropped to freezing. When I went for my daily walk, neighbors who had previously offered a polite nod now averted their eyes, clutching their phones as if I might be draining their batteries with my mere presence. I was the electronic bogeyman, the source of all their first-world technological frustrations. The isolation was palpable, a return to the lonely, disconnected feeling of my old life, where every conversation was guarded and every relationship was subject to a security clearance. A week later, Diane posted again, this time escalating her rhetoric from nuisance to public health hazard. The post was titled, "A Note on EMF and Our Families." "Hi everyone," it began, in a tone of grave seriousness. "I've been doing some reading on electromagnetic fields EMF and the potential long-term health effects of exposure to high levels of electrosmog. While most household devices are perfectly safe, large collections of high-powered electronic and broadcasting equipment can be a source of concern. Our children are the most vulnerable. It's always better to be safe than sorry when it comes to the well-being of our little ones. Protect our kids." This was a vile, baseless accusation, preying on the fears of parents and twisting scientific ignorance into a weapon. The high-powered broadcasting equipment she alluded to simply did not exist. My setup was almost entirely for passive reception. The few things that did transmit, like my Wi-Fi router, did so at a power level that was a tiny fraction of a standard cell phone's. But again, the facts were irrelevant. She had planted the seed of fear, and it was taking root. I saw it in the way a mother pulled her toddler a little closer when I walked by the community playground. I heard it in the hushed tones of neighbors talking in their driveways, their conversations stopping abruptly when they noticed me. I was in my office, staring out the basement window at the neatly trimmed lawn, feeling more isolated than I ever had in my soundproof box at the NSA. My life's work had been about connection, about understanding the hidden links that held the world together. And now, I was utterly disconnected from the 10 square blocks I called home. On my desk, there was a framed photograph, one of the few personal items I had kept from my old life. It was a picture of me, looking impossibly young in a crisp Air Force dress uniform, shaking the hand of a 4-star general. I was receiving the Defense Meritorious Service Medal for my role in a counterterrorism operation that had dismantled a global communications network. The citation, which I knew by heart, commended my unparalleled skill in signals intelligence and network analysis. I looked at the proud, focused young man in the photo, a man who had used technology to protect people. And now, here I was, being portrayed as a menace to children because of that same technology. The injustice of it was a bitter pill. The constant stress was beginning to wear on me. The feeling of being watched, judged, and ostracized was a low-frequency hum of anxiety that never quite went away. This was Diane's goal. She was creating an environment so socially toxic that I would be forced to leave. But leaving would mean abandoning my new home, my garden, my attempt at a normal life. More than that, it felt like letting her, and the ignorance she represented, win. And I had never been good at losing. It was on that day, sitting in my office, the metal photo staring back at me, that I made a decision. Ben was right. The encrypted signal I had found was the real threat in this neighborhood, not me. And using it to neutralize Diane's manufactured threat was a strategy that appealed to my old instincts. I pulled up the encrypted file containing the data logs and the contact information for FBI agent Kincaid. I composed a short, anonymous email from a secure, untraceable account. Tip regarding anomalous encrypted RF transmissions in Sterling Meadows. MD. The subject line read, I attached a small, heavily redacted sample of the data, enough to prove I was legitimate, without revealing my full capabilities. I hit send. The signal went out into the ether, a single, targeted packet of information. The game had been played on Diane's terms for too long. It was time to change the rules. The day the black sedan with government plates pulled up to my house was the day I knew my anonymous tip had landed. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was in my garden, pulling weeds from around my tomato plants, when the car slid to a quiet stop at the curb. 2 men in conservative suits got out. They moved with a placid, professional confidence that was unmistakable to anyone who had spent time in Washington, D.C. They were feds. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with fear, but with a jolt of adrenaline, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. I watched as they walked up my driveway. As they drew closer, I recognized one of them. It was Special Agent Kincaid from the FBI's Cybercrime Division. He was older now, with flecks of gray at his temples, but his sharp, intelligent eyes were the same. We had worked on a joint task force together a decade ago. He wouldn't know me as a civilian gardener. He would know me as Analyst Mercer, the guy from the NSA who could pull a digital needle out of a planetary haystack. Mr. Mercer. he said, his voice neutral as he approached. He was giving me the chance to play dumb, to maintain my cover as a simple retiree. Agent Kincaid, I replied, deciding to cut through the charade. It's been a long time. Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by a flicker of surprise, and then a deep, weary understanding. Alex, of course. Of course. It was you. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. When we got the tip, the quality of the data packet, we knew it wasn't a crank. We just didn't expect it to come from inside the target zone. I retired here, I said with a shrug, wiping dirt from my hands onto my jeans. I was looking for a quiet life. Kincaid let out a short, humorless laugh. You've got a hell of a way of picking them. Can we talk inside? We sat at my kitchen table, the afternoon sun streaming through the window. His partner, a younger agent named Rossi, stood quietly by the door. Your tip, Kincaid began, getting straight to the point, was a direct hit. The signal you identified belongs to a foreign intelligence unit we've been tracking for 18 months. They're a cyber espionage cell. We knew their general area of operations, but we hadn't been able to pinpoint their base. Until now, you've given us their front door. They're professionals, I said. The encryption is top tier. Tell me about it. Kincaid grimaced. We've been trying to crack it for a year. What we need is more data. We need a constant, close-range stream of their signal to run through our decryption arrays. The problem is, we can't get a surveillance van in here without tipping them off. This neighborhood is a fishbowl. They'd spot us in a second. He leaned forward, his expression intent. But you're already here. You have the equipment, you have the skills, and you have the perfect cover. You're just the weird new neighbor who likes electronics. They would never suspect you. The request was unspoken, but it hung in the air between us, heavy as lead. He was asking me to turn my home, my sanctuary, into a listening post for a federal counterintelligence operation. He was asking me to step back into the world I had just escaped. I'm a civilian now. Kincaid, I said quietly. I know, he replied, his voice sincere. And we can't compel you. This would be entirely voluntary. But Alex, these guys are a serious threat. They've already penetrated several major defense contractors. We need to shut them down. I thought about my quiet life, my garden, my desire to be left alone. Then I thought about the professional signature of the signal, the cold, efficient malice it represented, operating silently under the noses of my unsuspecting neighbors. I thought about Diane Davenport and her ridiculous, manufactured crusade against me. She was obsessed with phantom threats, while a real and present danger was operating just a few doors down. There was a grim, poetic justice to the situation that appealed to my sensibilities. My hoarded electronics, the very thing that made me a pariah in the neighborhood, were the only thing that could stop a genuine threat. All right, I said with a sigh of resignation. What do you need? For the next 2 hours, we planned the operation. It would be entirely passive. My role was simply to use my antenna array to capture their raw signal traffic and divert it through an encrypted, anonymized VPN tunnel to an FBI server. I would be a ghost, a simple relay point, to the outside world. I was just Alex Mercer, the retired tinkerer. But in secret, my quiet suburban home had just become the front line in a silent, invisible war. Before he left, Kincaid paused at the door. One more thing. Alex, this HOA, the woman, Davenport. We ran a cursory background check. She's a real piece of work. Has she been giving you trouble? You could say that, I said dryly. Try to keep a low profile, he advised. Don't engage with her. The last thing we need is for some petty neighborhood dispute to draw attention to this house. Just write it out. Once we make our move, and this is all over, your problem with her will likely resolve itself." I watched them get back into their sedan and drive away. The quiet street seemed different now, charged with a hidden significance. My peaceful retirement was officially over, and I had a feeling that Diane Davenport, in her obsessive quest to expose my secrets, was about to make a very, very big mistake. The day the FCC showed up was the day Diane, convinced of my malevolence and empowered by the silence of my refusal to engage, decided to bring in the full force of the federal government, or at least the part of it that dealt with radio waves. It was a Monday morning. I had just finished routing the feed from my primary SIGINT antenna to the FBI's encrypted server, a process that was now a part of my daily routine. The data was flowing seamlessly, a silent river of information leaving my home, and I was just settling in with a cup of coffee and a book on heirloom gardening when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a navy blue polo shirt with an official-looking FCC logo embroidered on the chest. He held a clipboard and a black Pelican case that I recognized as housing a portable spectrum analyzer. My heart didn't sink. Instead, I felt a sense of calm, calculated anticipation. Kincaid had warned me this might happen. Diane, frustrated by my non-compliance and fueled by her own paranoid fantasies, had clearly filed a formal complaint, likely accusing me of being some kind of pirate radio broadcaster. This was her next move in the escalation, and I was ready for it. I opened the door. "Can I help you?" I asked, affecting an air of mild, neighborly curiosity. "Good morning, sir," the agent said, his tone professional and all business. "My name is Agent Peters, Federal Communications Commission. We've received a complaint of significant signal interference originating from this address. The complainant alleges illegal broadcasts on multiple restricted frequencies, interfering with television, radio, and emergency service bands. I need to inspect any and all signal transmitting equipment on your property." "Illegal broadcasts," I said, raising my eyebrows in feigned surprise. "I think there must be some mistake. All of my equipment is for reception only. But please, come in. I have nothing to hide." I led him into my basement office. He stopped at the doorway, his eyes sweeping over the room. He saw the multiple monitors, the rack of servers humming quietly against the wall, the array of receivers, and the thick coaxial cables running up into the ceiling. His professional expression tightened slightly. To a layperson like Diane, this room looked like a villain's lair. To a trained professional like Agent Peters, it just looked serious. "That's a lot of gear for a hobbyist, Mr. Mercer," he said, his eyes lingering on my primary SDR, a software-defined radio capable of monitoring a huge swath of the radio spectrum. "I'm a retired communications engineer." I lied smoothly, giving him the more palatable version of the truth. "Old habits die hard. I enjoy monitoring ham radio operators, pulling down weather satellite images, that sort of thing." He set down his Pelican case and pulled out the spectrum analyzer. "Mind if I take a look?" "Not at all," I said, gesturing to the room. "Be my guest." For the next hour, Agent Peters conducted a meticulous sweep of my property. He tested the frequencies around my antennas. He scanned the output of my Wi-Fi routers. He checked for any RF leakage from my server rack. I watched him work, a quiet sense of detached amusement settling over me. He was a professional, a man who dealt in facts, in measurable data, and I knew the data would exonerate me completely. As he worked, he asked questions, his professional curiosity piqued by my setup. "This SDR," he said, pointing to my main unit. "It's a custom build, isn't it? The filtering on this is incredible. It looks like something we'd see at a government listening post. I like to tinker, I said with a modest smile. It was, in fact, a decommissioned NSA model I had legally purchased as surplus. Finally, he finished, packing his analyzer back into its case. He looked up at me, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "as I suspected, this was a complete waste of time. Your RF emissions are well within legal limits. In fact, your entire setup is one of the cleanest I've ever seen. There is absolutely no evidence of any illegal broadcasting. The interference your neighbor is complaining about is likely a result of her own faulty equipment or the general saturation of the Wi-Fi spectrum in this neighborhood. I'm sorry you had to come all this way for nothing," I said sincerely. "Me too," he grumbled, making a note on his clipboard. "We take complaints about interference with emergency bans very seriously, which is why we have to follow up. But this one smells like a simple neighborhood squabble. The complainant, a Ms. Diane Davenport, has filed 3 other complaints against residents on this street in the past year, all of them unfounded." He handed me a copy of his report. "For your records," he said, "it states clearly that you are in full compliance with FCC regulations. If she continues to harass you, my report might be useful." "Thank you, Agent Peters," I said, shaking his hand. I watched him leave, a quiet sense of victory settling over me. Diane had brought in the feds, and the feds had declared me a model citizen. She had tried to use the system against me, and the system had just validated me. I looked out the window and saw her standing on her porch, her arms crossed, watching the FCC agent drive away. The look on her face was not one of defeat, but of incandescent fury. She had been thwarted again. Her official channels were failing her. Her narrative was crumbling under the weight of actual facts. I knew, with the cold certainty of a threat analyst, that she was cornered, and a cornered enemy is always the most dangerous. Her next move would be desperate. It would be personal, and it would be her last. The final escalation was not a frivolous complaint or a covert act of vandalism. It was a direct, personal, and viciously calculated threat designed to utterly destroy my quiet life and expose the secrets I was trying to protect, both my own and the FBI's. Diane, having been publicly thwarted by the FCC, had clearly spent the intervening time digging, fueled by a righteous fury and a bottomless well of paranoia. She had become a detective in her own deranged spy novel, and I was her villain. She confronted me as I was bringing in my trash cans from the curb. She didn't bother with pretenses or pleasantries. She marched across her lawn and stopped directly in front of me, her face a mask of triumphant hatred. In her hand, she clutched a sheaf of papers, holding them out like a death warrant. "I know who you are. Alex Mercer," she hissed, her voice low and trembling with rage. "Or whatever your real name is." I stood my ground, my expression neutral, my heart rate steady. I had been trained for confrontations like this, taught to project calm in the face of aggression. "I don't know what you're talking about, Diane." "Oh, don't you?" she sneered. She thrust the papers at me. They were printouts from a deep web search, articles from obscure national security blogs, and heavily redacted, declassified government personnel lists. She had somehow managed to find a faint, ghostly trace of my past career. A few mentions of my name connected to obscure NSA projects from the early 2000s. To anyone else, it would be meaningless jargon. To a paranoid mind like Diane's, it was a Rosetta Stone of conspiracy. National Security Agency, Signals Intelligence. She read from a page, her voice dripping with accusation. Project Aquatint. Raven Rock. You weren't a communications engineer. You were a spy. A spook. One of the government's little ghouls who listens in on everyone's private conversations. The public-facing story of my career had been carefully sanitized, but she had managed to scratch away enough of the surface to reveal a sliver of the truth. A sliver she had twisted into a weapon. You moved into our quiet neighborhood, she continued, her voice rising with hysteria. And you built yourself a private listening post. Those antennas, the servers, all that hoarded junk in your basement. It's not for a hobby. You're spying on us, on all of us. You're listening to our phone calls, reading our emails, violating our privacy. That's why the FCC couldn't find anything. You're too clever for them. You're a professional. The accusation was insane, a perfect projection of her own invasive nature onto me. The irony was staggering. I was helping the FBI protect this neighborhood from a genuine threat, while she was accusing me of being the threat itself. That's a very serious and very false accusation. Diane, I said, my voice cold and hard. Is it? She shot back, her eyes glittering. I don't think so. And I don't think the media will think so either. This was it, her final, desperate move. I have prepared a little press kit, she said, a cruel smile spreading across her face. It has everything. Photos of your house, your antennas, copies of my HOA complaints, the FCC report, which I will frame as a cover-up, of course. And these. She waved the printouts about my past. My research into your real career. I've written a letter. It's addressed to the Washington Post, the local news channels, and every conspiracy blogger I can find. The headline writes itself. Ex-NSA spy sets up illegal domestic surveillance nest in quiet Maryland suburb. The threat was catastrophic, not just to me, but to the FBI's investigation. If she went to the media, this neighborhood would be swarmed. The espionage cell I was helping to monitor would be tipped off, and they would vanish. Their entire network disappearing back into the digital ether. Years of work, gone. A national security threat, unleashed. My quiet life would be over. My name and face plastered everywhere. My home besieged. I am giving you one last chance, she declared, her voice ringing with the finality of an ultimatum. You will dismantle it all. Every antenna, every server, every last wire. You will strip that basement office bare. You will get rid of your hoarded junk, and you will live like a normal person. You have until the HOA meeting on Saturday night to show me proof that it is all gone. If you do not, I will walk out of that meeting, and I will personally email my press kit to every reporter on my list. Your life as a quiet retiree will be over. She believed she had me checkmated. She had found a threat so total, so devastating, that she believed I would have no choice but to surrender. And for a fleeting moment, a wave of utter despair washed over me. She had, through sheer, relentless malice, put me in an impossible position. Complying meant letting the FBI investigation fail. Refusing meant a public explosion that would also cause the investigation to fail. She had found the perfect attack. But as I looked at her, at the triumphant hatred in her eyes, my despair solidified into something else. Something cold and hard and absolute. I was a man who had faced down threats far greater than a deranged HOA chairwoman. I had been trained to operate in impossible situations. And I would not let this woman, in her bubble of ignorance and paranoia, jeopardize a critical national security operation. I would not let her win. The HOA meeting on Saturday. Then, I said, my voice calm, my mind already working, processing variables, calculating responses, planning a countermove. I'll see you there. Diane? I turned and walked back into my house. leaving her standing on the sidewalk, momentarily confused by my lack of panic. The game was reaching its endgame. She had made her final, devastating threat. And in doing so, she had given me the one thing I needed: a time, a place, and a public forum for the trap I was about to spring. The community clubhouse at Sterling Meadows was a sterile, beige room, a perfect reflection of the aesthetic Diane Davenport championed. On Saturday night, it was packed to capacity, the air thick with anticipation and a low hum of anxious gossip. Diane had billed this emergency HOA meeting as her personal vindication, the public trial and execution of the neighborhood menace, Alex Mercer. She had sent out emails, posted on the community forum, and personally knocked on doors, ensuring a maximum audience for my downfall. I walked in and took a seat in the back, just as I had planned with Kincaid. I felt the eyes of my neighbors on me, suspicious, fearful, hostile. I met none of them. I simply sat, my hands resting on my knees, a picture of calm, and waited. Diane stood at a podium at the front of the room, basking in the spotlight. She was dressed in a severe navy blue suit, an outfit meant to convey authority and grim purpose. She tapped the microphone, and a shriek of feedback momentarily silenced the room. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice resonating with a practiced, somber gravity. "I have called this meeting because our community is facing a threat unlike any we have ever known." For the next 20 minutes, she laid out her grand, paranoid case against me. She was a masterful performer, weaving a narrative of escalating terror from the disparate threads of my quiet life. She presented blown-up photographs of my house, with red circles drawn around the antennas, the server rack in my garage, the coaxial cables. She spun the FCC visit not as an exoneration, but as a near miss, proof that I was toying with dangerous forces. "But tonight," she announced, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I can reveal the horrible truth. Mr. Mercer is not a hobbyist. He is not a retiree. He is a former spy for the National Security Agency." A collective gasp went through the crowd. This was the bombshell she had been waiting to drop. "He has used his expertise to build a private, illegal surveillance station right here, in our midst," she cried, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "He is listening to our calls. He is reading our emails. He is violating the sanctity of our homes. He is a predator, and we are his prey." The room was in an uproar. People were looking at me with open hatred and fear. I remained perfectly still. "I have given him an ultimatum," Diane declared, raising her voice to be heard over the din. "I have demanded that he dismantle his spy nest. He has refused. Therefore, the board has no choice. I am presenting a motion for the HOA to file an immediate emergency injunction, to have his equipment removed, and to have Mr. Mercer formally censured and fined to the maximum extent of our bylaws. Furthermore, as soon as this meeting is over, I will be releasing my full investigation to the national media." She held up a thick manila envelope. "It's all in here. The world will know who and what he is by morning." This was it. Her checkmate. She called for the vote. "All in favor of the motion." Nearly every hand in the room shot up. It was a landslide. Diane's face was a mask of pure, ecstatic triumph. She looked at me, her eyes glittering with victory. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "do you have anything to say before I end this meeting and contact the press?" "I do," I said, my voice carrying easily through the suddenly quiet room. I stood up. "But I believe there are a few people who would like to speak first." On cue, the double doors at the back of the clubhouse opened. Two men in dark, conservative suits entered. They walked down the center aisle with the quiet, unshakable authority of men who are accustomed to being in charge. They were Agent Kincaid and Agent Rossi of the FBI. They stopped at the podium. Kincaid took in the room with a calm, sweeping gaze before his eyes settled on Diane. Her triumphant expression had vanished, replaced by a look of utter, baffled confusion. "Good evening," Kincaid said, his voice calm but carrying an immediate weight of command. "I am Special Agent Kincaid, FBI Cybercrime Division. This is Special Agent Rossi. We're here tonight to talk about a patriot." He gestured toward me. "For the past several months, Mr. Alex Mercer, a decorated veteran of the United States intelligence community, has been providing critical, voluntary assistance to a major federal counterintelligence investigation." The silence in the room was now absolute, so profound you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. "Unbeknownst to you," Kincaid continued, his gaze moving across the stunned faces of my neighbors, "a highly sophisticated foreign espionage cell has been operating right here, in Sterling Meadows. They have been responsible for the theft of billions of dollars in classified defense and industrial data. They are a significant threat to our national security." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "We were unable to move on them without tipping them off. We needed a way to monitor their communications silently, from a close proximity. We needed a unique combination of equipment and expertise. We needed Mr. Mercer." Kincaid looked directly at Diane, his eyes cold as steel. "The spy nest you have been so obsessed with, Ms. Davenport, has been our single most important asset in this investigation. The hoarded junk you have sought to have removed is the very technology that has allowed us to identify every member of this cell, to map their network, and to prepare to dismantle their entire operation. An operation that will be taking place tonight." He let that hang in the air for a beat. "So you see, far from being a threat to this community, Mr. Mercer has been its silent, anonymous protector." He then held up his hand, and Rossi handed him a thin file. "Now, let's talk about your press kit. Ms. Davenport, your constant, baseless harassment, your frivolous complaints to other federal agencies, and your final reckless threat to go to the media have not only wasted valuable resources, but have placed a multi-year, multi-agency investigation and the lives of federal agents in severe jeopardy. By attempting to shut down Mr. Mercer's hobby, you have been actively, if unwittingly, providing aid and comfort to a hostile foreign intelligence service." He took a step closer to the podium, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous level. "That is a very, very serious thing. Ms. Davenport, some people might even call it obstruction of justice, or perhaps even treason." Diane Davenport stood frozen, her face as white as a sheet. The manila envelope slipped from her numb fingers and fell to the floor with a soft, pathetic slap. Her meticulously constructed world, her entire reality, had just been publicly and brutally annihilated. The aftermath was as swift and silent as the operation it had protected. As the stunned residents of Sterling Meadows filed out of the clubhouse, Agent Kincaid and Agent Rossi quietly escorted a trembling, utterly broken Diane Davenport to their car for a long, off-the-record chat. While she was never formally charged with obstruction, Kincaid later told me they had used the threat as leverage to ensure her absolute and permanent silence. The consequences for her were no less devastating. The HOA board, facing a tidal wave of anger from the community and the terrifying, unspoken threat of FBI scrutiny, was dissolved in disgrace within a week. The HOA's management company, upon being briefed by the board's lawyers about what had transpired, immediately invoked a clause in their contract and terminated their services, citing gross misconduct and exposure to extreme liability. Diane became a ghost in her own neighborhood. The public humiliation was total. No one would speak to her. No one would even look at her. Her reign of terror, built on a foundation of suspicion and control, had evaporated overnight. Within a month, a for sale sign appeared on her pristine lawn. The sale was quick, and she was gone, disappearing from Sterling Meadows as completely as if she had never been there. The morning after the meeting, just before dawn, a series of quiet, professional raids were conducted. I watched from my window as unmarked vans slid silently down the street. Teams of FBI agents, clad in black, moved with practiced efficiency, and the members of the espionage cell, a seemingly normal family of 4, living 3 houses down, were taken into custody without incident. The real threat had been neutralized, not with a bang, but with the quiet click of handcuffs. The community, mortified and deeply ashamed, underwent a profound change. The suspicion they had directed at me was transformed into a mixture of awe, respect, and a healthy dose of fear. I was no longer the weirdo with the antennas. I was the quiet man who had protected them all. My privacy, once a source of contention, was now sacrosanct. The new ad hoc HOA board's first and only motion was to formally commend me for my service and to declare a permanent moratorium on any bylaw enforcement that infringed upon a resident's reasonable enjoyment of their home and hobbies. The FBI offered me a lucrative consulting contract and a formal commendation from the director. I politely declined the contract, but accepted the letter, which I filed away without ceremony. My work was done. I had found my quiet, though not in the way I had expected. My antennas remained on the roof, but they were no longer listening for spies. Now, they were pointed at the heavens, pulling down beautiful, ghostly images from weather satellites, a silent, swirling portrait of the world at peace. I sat on my back porch, a cup of coffee in hand, listening to the birds. The digital chatter was gone. The only frequency left was the gentle, analog hum of a quiet suburban morning.